So thanks, Sheila, for giving us the go ahead. I'm Roger Bush. I'm a general internist in Seattle. And today we're going to be talking about rural internal medicine residency development. Just a couple of disclosures here. Our work has been, much of this work has been funded by HRSA as part of its rural residency program development group. I work as a technical advisor for them, helping set up rural residency programs. I also need to disclose that I'm a current director of the American Board of Internal Medicine and the American Board of Family Medicine. But I need to say I'm not going to give away any of their secrets. Not that there's a lot of secrets there, but what I will say is that from working as a director at ABIM and ABFM, and as a program director, having helped start a couple of residencies and run another one, and as a former member of the review committee for internal medicine for ACGME, I can see this huge chasm of workforce issues for rural America, particularly in internal medicine. We have some serious structural issues of we're not preparing people for practice in rural medicine, where it feels like we're preparing people for general internists for practice at urban referral centers largely, and we're not training people in rural areas, so they don't come to see themselves as rural residents. So goals for today are to give you a view of the trajectory of program development, sort of some narratives of people that have actually done this, the real people doing the real work in the real place, and their successes, the opportunities, the roadblocks that they ran into, and the workarounds and the solutions that go with it. To show the benefit of internal medicine residency program development as part of the interprofessional care team in rural America, and to give you some idea of challenges and nuances. Let me introduce our other presenters. Joe Weigel is a master of the American College of Physicians, lifelong resident of Somerset, Kentucky. Joe is allopathically trained, but started an osteopathically accredited program in Somerset, Kentucky, and it's been going for about 10 years now. Amanda Finley is in Paris, Tennessee. Amanda trained in the osteopathic tradition and I'm quite confident and hopeful that in a week or so, she's going to learn that she's got a new program accredited in the single pathway for her small community in Henry County Medical Center in Paris, Tennessee. Matt Tobey is a general internist, splitting his time between Boston at Mass General Hospital, but also at Rosebud, South Dakota, which I'm going to bet that most of you haven't been to Rosebud. If you have, you're going to appreciate it as maybe not the most isolated place in the country, but arguably the most deprived place in the country. So we're going to pick up the narratives of these three program stories and leaving plenty of time for discussion at the end. I will ask you to put yourselves on mute during the presentations. I'll be watching chat, and I'll try to bring questions up as they in a timely way. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Joe Weigel.
Thank you, Roger, and thanks to all of you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our story and our journey. We think that what we're trying to do, as Roger has alluded to, is to provide training in such a way that that people who choose to live in rural areas in this country really have the opportunity to come into an encounter with a physician who has a vested interest in living in the community and also in being familiar with some of the issues that are a little bit different in rural America than they might be in more urban areas. As Roger has alluded to, I am a lifelong resident, at least for the bulk of my life in Somerset, which is about 75 miles south of Lexington, Kentucky, and about 120 miles north of Knoxville. And I'll talk a little bit more about that geography in a bit. I grew up here, went to high school here, married my high school sweetheart from here, went away to undergraduate school and medical school in Louisville, Kentucky, and then trained at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. I then came back to this community to work with my father, who was one of the few general internists in this part of the state of Kentucky, and practiced with him for 3 years before he retired. So I really had a long time experience teaching both medical students and ARNP students and PA students in my practice for a long period of time before I began to consider the possibility of doing something a little bit different near the end of my career. Next slide, Roger. So as I stated earlier, Somerset is really just west of Appalachia. It's on the western side of I-75 as it splits the almost mid-Kentucky. We really truly would be considered near Appalachia and not true Appalachia, but we certainly are in the foothills. And many of the patients that we deal with have similar healthcare issues as the people from Appalachia. We would be considered a secondary medical center. As you can see on the slide, the county population is about 60,000, but our service area is close to 250,000. We literally have almost all medical subspecialties here. We have two of the busiest neurosurgeons in the entire state of Kentucky. And so we really truly handle everything here with the exception of major trauma. Next slide, please, Roger. So my beginning is as having true involvement in graduate medical education really truly was serendipitous. There was a CEO at the hospital here who had had some contact with a sister Life Point hospital in Danville, Virginia, where they had just about 14 years ago started graduate medical education with an internal medicine and family medicine program. And when I was approached by the CEO here about actually starting graduate medical education, I almost laughed because I thought that the idea of trying to establish a residency, full-time residency program here was almost ludicrous. But after I went to Danville a couple of times and talked with my mentor over there, a nephrologist who was the program director, he convinced me that it was doable and that I had the ability and the experience to make it happen if I had a little bit of help. So it really was a leap of faith at the end of my own practice, or towards the end of my own practice career, to begin to think about this process. As Roger's already talked about, we did start as an osteopathically oriented program and received accreditation from the osteopathic world before the single program began, probably no more than 2 years after we received osteopathic accreditation. And we spent the first 4 years almost going through a continuous accreditation process. Next slide, Roger. So over the course, and we have now had a program here for right at a decade. We have 21 internal medicine residents and are approved for 24. We have 18 family medicine programs, residents in our program, so close to 40 trainees here at any one time. We also do undergraduate medical education here from two of the osteopathic schools close to us, one in Pikeville, Kentucky, and one in Harrogate, Tennessee. So at any one point in time, we have close to 60 undergraduate and graduate medical education learners on our campus. Next slide, Roger. So talking about some of the things that are a little bit different in the rural world than they are in the urban world. Certainly from the very beginning, since the CEO who was here at the time brought this to me. I think that from the beginning, it's fair to say that we've had a good deal of institutional buy-in. Although, as I'll talk about here in just a moment, actually moving ahead with our primary hospital as our sponsoring institution has only been a recent occurrence. Our sponsoring institution was an OPTI, which is kind of a graduate medical education offshoot of osteopathic education. And that OPTI was located 4 hours away. So only recently have we had our own DIO on campus here. As the other people will speak to a little bit later on today, trying to keep faculty intact in a hospital that is basically filled with teachers who are primarily interested in patient care and in earning a living has been and will continue to be a constant challenge. Although having worked here for nearly 3 decades with these people made that buy-in for me a little bit easier from the beginning. And finally, I'll speak just a little bit about key person issues, which are a much different thing to consider inside a rural program in a rural area than they are in more urbanized medical centers. We have started to begin succession planning, and I've have begun to speak with the people who are here about how much longer I'm willing to do this now. And I think that we're beginning to lay out a future for this program to make certain that it survives. But in any rural area, the program director wears many, many, many different hats. And I spend at least as much time with our undergraduate learners as I do with our graduate learners. So trying to make certain that the program is going to survive after both myself and maybe even more importantly, my program coordinator, who's been with me from the beginning, is no longer here, is always a challenge. Next slide, Roger. So from a positive point of view, I would say to all of you who consider this at all, that as the last third of my professional career, this has been the best job of my life. And I say that with all sincerity. I get just incredible, immense pleasure of watching both my undergraduates and my graduates continue to move through our program here. It has made me want to come to work every day in a way that I didn't always feel, as sometimes seeing patient after patient year after year got to be a little bit difficult. I think also we've unequivocally increased the physician supply in our area. We have already have 4 family physicians from these programs who are working with us here locally. There are another 4 who are already signed to continue over the course of the next 2 years of graduates. There are 2 local primary care internists who are working in a community about 30 miles from here. We have totally turned over our hospitalist program here, and it's basically filled now with people I either recruited here to teach our trainees or with our trainees themselves as they've stayed here to work with us. Even though subspecialty training is not really what we pursue, we have a practicing nephrologist back here who started off in our program and trained at the University of Kentucky. And we are sending one of our graduates off to do pulmonary medicine and critical care at St. Louis University this year. So I would say that no way that this happens without the development of graduate medical education inside this community. And then finally, I think that we've been able to totally shift the culture inside our hospital here from one just another rural hospital to a true teaching center. And there's no question that COVID care inside this community would have no way have been the same had the internal medicine residency program been here. We have an open ICU, and one of the real benefits of training in a rural area for us is that our residents truly are facile in high-level critical care and are procedurally incredibly adept by the time they graduate from our program, and it's a big deal for hospitals who are looking to employ them. Next slide, please, Roger. So is it worth it? Unequivocally. You do have to have a small group of incredibly devoted people who really truly want to do this. And again, I'll mention my program coordinator, Ms. Crow, who is on this teaching session today. And there's no way that I could have ever done this without her. There has to be a true institutional commitment, and I think that our institution has become steadily more committed to our existence as they've seen what we've been able to do. And then if you really believe in the end that if you really want to improve the quality of healthcare that's available to you and your family inside this community, that this is a real way to do it. So again, I'm grateful for the time to present our journey here today, and we'll be happy to entertain any questions at the end of this presentation.
Matt, you're on.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger, and thanks for the great presentation, Joe. It's always an honor to be a part of these sessions. So as Roger said, my name is Matt. I'm an internist who works with time split with the Rosebud Service Unit of the Indian Health Service and Mass General Hospital. We have a partnership to staff the Rosebud Service Unit through MGH. Today, I'm not speaking as a representative of the Indian Health Service in any way. These are my own opinions. So a little bit about Rosebud to get us started. First, Roger mentioned the word deprived, and it's not inaccurate. There's a term called the Area Deprivation Index, and Rosebud does score the highest score on that of 100. On the other hand, it's an incredibly rich community and just a fantastic place to spend time. And, I've lived a quarter of my life there for the last 7 years. So Roger, if you back up one slide, I think that's in there in part to sort of demonstrate the richness of Rosebud in many ways. One of the first times my wife, who's also a physician, came out to Rosebud, she was just struck by what an amazing, tightly knit, wonderful place it truly is. So just want to kind of highlight that as we start. I was always taught by a community member to lead with the strengths, which are many when talking about Rosebud. So to move forward, there has been an effort to first, at the community's direction, establish a faculty and staffing presence at the local hospital. So this really is born out of history. So in 1868, the Rosebud Sioux tribe signed a treaty with the U.S. government that guaranteed a physician in perpetuity. So about 10 years ago, we visited Rosebud as a teaching hospital at the request of the Indian Health Service. And what the community said is they really wanted to make sure that physician staffing, which was guaranteed to them through a treaty, is something that was being adequately provided locally. And it has been a struggle. Even in 2015, the emergency department shut down for a while due to staffing and accreditation challenges. There was a lawsuit between the community and the federal government, which the community won, saying that their treaty rights had been violated at that instance. So it's been very meaningful to be part of honoring that treaty, as well as really engaging with the community around all variety of clinical and health equity activities. So as this timeline shows, there are a few different buckets of work that we've done in Rosebud, and I'll focus on residency training today, but just to give a brief overview. In terms of clinical staffing, in 2016, we began with one rotating physician in Rosebud at a time, moved to two a few years later, and now we have 3 physicians every day. So a quarter of the year, that's me. We have a core faculty team that rotates there from Mass General. Also, a lot of physicians rotate from Minneapolis and a few other sites around the country, including University of South Dakota. There's an emphasis to try to make this as much of a local regional partnership as possible, given the infrastructures there. And so in education, the Indian Health Service for decades has had a pretty high volume elective rotation model. So this happens mostly in the Southwest, but residents do go for 2 or 4 weeks and rotate around the IHS. Many people have done that. I've heard people from generations before say that that was a really foundational experience for them in their training. And so we have helped elective rotations happen for residents, medical students, PA students, NP students for many years now. And there's been a goal now for 3 or 4 years to establish a longitudinal residency in Rosebud. And so I'm going to cover some of the challenges and opportunities with that today and the models that we've looked at. But before I do that, we also work a lot in community health. So the community has asked us to support grant writing and behavioral health activities So we spend a lot of time writing HRSA and SAMHSA grants and then helping the community get those programs up and running with local staff. So that's another really meaningful way that we've been able to engage. Great. Thanks so much, Roger. We can go to the next slide. So we've looked at a few GME models for Rosebud. So the model that is currently being supported through the HRSA Rural Residency Development and Implementation Program, sorry, the RRPD Planning and Development Program is the CMS Rural Track Program designation. So those designations require residents to spend 50% of their time in a rural community. And so there are many of these programs that match residents between an urban training hospital where they do their ICU time and some of their high complexity training, and then time in a rural community. So for example, in the Indian Health Service, the very first GME model for a federal program started just last year. It's a split time between University of New Mexico and Shiprock, or Northern Navajo Medical Center, an IHS site. That's in family medicine. And it's off to a great start. There were some challenges around funding, but it's up and running. So that's one model that we've been looking at for Rosebud. And so there's a few barriers we run into. For instance, it's a 2,000-mile commute between the two hospitals. And although I do that all the time, it's a lot to ask for a trainee. But really the biggest barrier has been to take a historically challenged hospital in a very remote place that has a lack of local amenities and come up with a longitudinal plan for a resident to live there for a year and a half. And so the professional environment of the hospital has been a major focus, as well as making sure the housing and sort of local resources available to residents are sufficient. So we haven't moved forward with that yet. We were hoping we could faster. We've had the HRSA planning grant for about 3 years now. So that was one learning point, is just what tall barriers there are for a model like that. Also in internal medicine, with the need for ICU training and graduated responsibility back in a large hospital, trying to figure out how exactly to build that block residency schedule so residents are getting the best parts of internal medicine training is another piece that has been a bit of a barrier. What we've been looking at more recently is a VA-like model. So the VA system has some $2 billion for education, claims 40,000 residents rotate through its system every year. And it's been a real centerpiece of the VA for decades and decades. The Indian Health Service has essentially $0 for physician education. It has now 2 residents in New Mexico. And that stark disparity between the 2 federal agencies, which are otherwise, have many things in common, is pretty striking. So the VA did receive funding through its Mission Act a few years ago to actually fund residencies in the IHS. So the idea was essentially to bootstrap residencies through the VA to get them started at federal Indian Health Service hospitals as well as tribal programs. And so the major barrier there is that it's just been very slow to roll out. The VA released its draft final rule last winter around this time, closed that in July, and we're still waiting on it to release an RFA. So we are hoping to take advantage of this immediately upon implementation and get residents rotating out, like in the VA, often for a month at a time, to Rosebud through the Mission Act funding. So that's where we're at right now with GME. Next slide. I think I have one more. Yeah, so there's been a lot of work to do, and we're very engaged in doing this at the nationwide level as well, which has been just incredibly satisfying to work with people like Roger and learn from people like Amanda and Joe. So locally, just a relentless focus on the learning and professional environment has been absolutely critical. We have an annual survey we send out, and the ratings of the professional environment and learning environment are slowly improving, but it's been a lot of work. We've been working to organize at a national level some academic medical center and IHS partnerships. I have a slide showing some of that work from the fall. We've been building curriculum. We have a sort of local curriculum about settler colonialism with local voices that sort of tell the story of the community and the health system. We did explore the internal medicine rural track program model in depth. There are very few internal medicine rural track programs. Actually, we have a manuscript now accepted as of a few days ago. So you all can keep an eye on the Journal of General Internal Medicine accepted that paper, and hopefully that'll be a helpful resource for other programs looking at some of these models. And then we've been doing a lot of education of stakeholders in the IHS and communities like Rosebud about how it can fit into the workforce development needs of the system. And we're hoping to write another piece about the current GME programs in the Indian health system, not just the federal sites, but there are also several community-based residencies that are either getting started up or there are one or two that are already implemented. Next slide. And then this is a group of us who do this work, many folks who are leaders in different parts of the country. And it was really a pleasure to convene with them all at the end of September this fall to talk about these models, not just in graduate medical education, but it's such a hot button topic with all the funding and support happening nationally in building these models. There's a lot of hope that it will be a way forward to really strengthen the Indian health system for years to come. So true honor and pleasure to be involved there. If anyone in this webinar is interested in learning more, I'd love to chat. I'll make sure that y'all get our emails after the session, but that's what I've got. Thanks, Roger.
Amanda, take us home.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak with you. I am from Paris, Tennessee, which is located in Northwest Tennessee, kind of in the Delta region where most of our industry is agriculture. We serve a service region of about 32,000 people, very rural, and most of the hospitals in the area are also very smaller. And we have 141 beds according to Medicare, but currently after COVID, we only have 24 to 39 adult beds and then an active OBGYN service. The area is very unique in that most of the physicians that we have here and the active surgery staff, we are all locals. And so we went away to medical school and residency and we came back. And it's striking how many of us really are homegrown just by this is where our home is originally. We can go to the next slide. So when we kind of started this journey before COVID, we were looking at how to address the barriers of the aging primary care population and a lack of locals going off to medical school and coming back. It's not a consistent supply there. How can we grow that more naturally as part of our hospital? And, there's several studies that really show that if you grow your own, if you introduce people early into a rural environment and get them to love the environment, then they have tendencies to come back. And where you go to residency, you're comfortable in practicing there. And that practice pattern is a safe place to stay as an attending later. So there was huge community buy-in. Our community already has a well-established physician assistant program, which is situated across the street. We have been doing medical school affiliations and having medical students from 2 different osteopathic colleges here in the hospital. So it was naturally kind of a thing to think about. Maybe we could offer more in this case of a residency program. So we had did our population evaluations similar to Dr. Toby. We had a very significant medically underserved population here and not enough providers to serve our population. And a lot of people were traveling 2 to 3 hours for routine care. And that was something that was a known issue and a barrier to adequate care for our people. So we wrote and got awarded the HRSA grant, and has been a game changer in the amount of resources and connections to other rural programs has been invaluable. The distance from our hospital to specialists have been a significant barrier. Obviously, in Paris, Tennessee, we just don't have a plethora of geriatricians or infectious disease physicians. So building bridges with our tertiary referral centers was kind of the first thing we set out to do. And the best place I found to find out who those people were to ask the more mature and developed private practices in town is, who do you refer to for rheumatology? Where do you have the best connections? And those were the first people I called first, asking them, hey, I was referred to you by Dr. So-and-so, and he says that you have such a great relationship with the patients in our community. What do you think about being involved in something like this and training doctors to learn to practice? And that was really a great conversation starter. And it built a natural subspecialty panel that was able to collaborate with our patients just by nature who were already interested and invested. Now, the core faculty, we already have the advantage of having a dedicated hospitalist staff and several outpatient internal medicine doctors. So that by itself kind of leaned to maybe that's a win. And through COVID, we have definitely weathered the storm of the healthcare environment and the sustainability and stability worries. And so as we move forward, that has reshaped the way the hospital has practiced medicine and the way the program is going to look too. Next slide. So this has been a large piece of work that changed weekly, daily for a while before we submitted our application for accreditation. The block schedule, which I'm not sure may be really small on your screen, but I can send it out to anyone who's interested. The orange ones are the ones that are going to be out of the building by nature. So I really tried to design a block schedule for the first year where they're mostly going to be home. So they start to develop by nature that this is home, this is rural medicine, this is what the culture is, where you have the opportunity to really take up your game and be professional and train your residents to go out and continue to carry that reputation well. And then as they go into out rotations, we had to start thinking about the impact on the sustainability of it. Because you have the issues with your FTEs, how many FTEs are going to be in the building, and all the PLAs, and making sure that all of those are stable, and the variables that go into working with other organizations and their changes, and the housing cost. One of the big questions I had for accreditation is, where are they going to stay? What is the expectations on housing, on lectures, on travel? How is that going to look and feel? And that is something that's really important in maintaining your residents' wellness as they're having to travel. How do we make that a safe and beneficial environment, and not something that's going to be detrimental and burdensome? The fragility and collaborations and connections. Obviously, it's like a network, and there's so many variables that could change so quickly. And that is something that we've had to rewrite PLAs, find new affiliations. It's something that's constantly changing and probably will. So, as a physician, you naturally think of plan A, B, and C. The next slide is on to kind of the timeline where we've been on the last 3 years. So I'm on year 3 of the RRPD grant with HRSA. And, the deliverable for this is to get residents here by the end of the summer. So we may not get there, but we're going to get darn close. So you can kind of tell in year 1, we had our application and initial accreditation for our sponsoring institution. Now, we are unique. We don't have a mothership that's external. We are a county-owned hospital, community-owned hospital. So we are serving as our own sponsoring institution. That has benefits and barriers also. The benefits is we get to create our own adventure. The barriers is that it does create issues with not having the automatic network that the bigger affiliations may provide. We did get our accreditation for our sponsoring institution, and we're pending our site visit for that later this year. And then on to year 2, we started working on our program application. And that was really where the heavy lifting came into place of getting the CVs and getting the block diagram, making sure your curriculum is written and reviewed. That is where, Linda Burks is on the lecture with me. You really have to have a good coordinator who is just a go-getter and okay to pick up the phone and maybe be a little persistent in trying to get the things done that needs to get done. It's really invaluable. And if you look into where we are now into year 3, we did submit our internal medicine application, and it was a really quick timeline to our virtual site visit. And the site visit, they ask a lot of the questions about how it's going to look and feel. How are we going to do these things without having infectious disease here all the time, or cardiology even here all the time? How is that going to happen? And how are we going to get the goals and objectives for internal medicine done? And that really, it was to our benefit to think through those things. And also, it was kind of reassuring that we went through a lot of the curriculum and we've thought out a really good plan. So we're currently pending decision. And if the organization choose to pursue, we could throw down a scramble and potentially SOBA class for this year. I think likely our organization, due to some core faculty changes, will probably not participate in the SOAP and match, and probably will give another whole year to recruitment, core faculty development, and extend it a year. And potentially it could be done in 3 years. But it's action packed, and the lessons learned have been invaluable. Next slide. PLAs in jeopardy. There's just so many moving parts, at least in this region in healthcare. There's so many changing hands of practices that it makes things a constant moving target. And as a DIO and a program director, keeping tabs on those moving parts are no small task. And physicians are ready for changes and maybe new waters after this COVID season. So stabilizing core faculty and making sure that you have an engaged faculty crew is also a barrier in a small town that may not have all the amenities of the bigger cities. I have been a lobbyist heavy for the state and on the national level, speaking to our congressman about the issues with GME funding and the barriers that exist for rural hospitals like us that may fall under the radar of the big institutions. And things talking about like the percentages of how many programs have to be rural, FTE rules, caps. And there's so many variables. Whereas a Medicare dependent hospital, that in itself has its own variables that we had to be very careful about understanding. C-suite changes, space allocation, and watching those FTEs as they travel is a constant barrier. Next slide, I think, is my last one. So thinking about the things I would tell someone who started the journey again, know your dates and everything well. I think I took a screenshot of the internal medicine from the ACGME page, just the agenda dates and the closing dates and the meeting times, and realizing that you have to get your site visit done before you can get on the agenda, and leaving that time lapse there was a good lesson that I would try to reiterate, is knowing your time frame, and kind of even just shoot them an email and verbalize what your plans are to make sure you understand and they understand kind of what you're thinking about. They're really great to email and very resourceful. Program requirement changes rolled out about the same time I submitted my application. I had to be responsible for them, even though they weren't into play when I first started the application. Be aware of the internal medicine program requirements and all the changes as they go into place. Talking with other people about a possible SOAP and the opportunities with that, it really seems like it would be a viable option if the program is geared up and ready to go. I think you could get a full class just from SOAP alone, and a good class at that. And don't be afraid to communicate your needs to your community, whether it be local, state, or your congressman. They really do want to know. It's a hot topic. Healthcare is needing help, and they want to hear from physicians on the front line. So be an advocate and make your voice known, and try to meet the people that represent your regions. Strong coordinator is worth their weight in gold and platinum. I cannot speak that enough. I am so excited to have who I have for this journey. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. So gear up and wait for it. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to stop screen sharing and we can go to the whole group. Yeah, so a couple of themes that I'd like to bring up, and please place your questions in chat so that we can address them while we are still on the session. Networking. The idea of starting a new program in Seattle or Boston or a big city where there's several urban referral centers, it's a different deal than a small town. You go to rural America, there may be nobody there that has any experience in graduate medical education. They don't even know the language of GME. So one of the things we see from the Planning and Development Technical Assistance Center is getting that program director on site. You all are very, I agree with you that program coordinator who is very resourceful is key, but getting a program director is even more important. And there's a structural problem there. In order to get internal medicine training, like Joe and I, it had to go to a city from a small town to learn to be a program director, and getting back to that small town, it's not everybody that can do it. It's great for Joe and Amanda to be able to plug into those local connections. I think it also is important that the networking aspect, once you have the people on site, it's easy to feel a sense of isolated desperation. Like, I don't know who to call. I don't know what the problems are. Just having somebody to talk to is important. I think that's in their wisdom, HRSA put together this grant to help folks get a little bit of technical assistance. But I think Aptum and other professional organizations are absolutely key, so that there's a place to come together and ask and feel a sense of community around these problems. Amanda, Matt, Joe, can you speak to that issue of networking and how you approached it at an early stage?
Yeah, I think that my journey really has been a little bit different, Roger, than Amanda's has been. Amanda really truly went through a process in which she reached out, received funding, and has had a little bit of advice about how to build out her program. I really truly am very honest when I tell you that my coordinator and I just almost cobbled this all together piece by piece over time, and really were without a lot of guidance as we put this program together. And I'm very grateful now to have, through Roger and through several other people, to have become aware of these resources, and am more than happy to try to commit our experience to these resources too, to try to tell people where we've stumbled, where we've fallen, where we've found assistance, where we've found help, and just how important inside trying to build these programs out, the concept of mentorship is. And my hope would be that organizations like Aptum would and AAIM would really take us up under their wing and realize the different issues that are present for rural programs that are present for urban programs and university-based programs, and really try to enthusiastically support us as we move through this, that professionally we feel like we have that level of support, and also have a home or a roof to go to for rural teaching and rural medicine that really truly is a little bit different, because our problems are different and our issues are different than they are in university settings.
Amanda, can you a word about networking? What have you found useful? And is there another network in the osteopathic community that you found beneficial? Because I think that's not as well represented in AAIM.
You know, we obviously have our own colleges like ACOI, and we have the AOGME, which has a similar forum. But you know, with single accreditation, and we're kind of becoming redundant, but the AOGME does by nature represent a more rural voice and more underserved voice. And so I think that always provides a context. You know, getting to one of the questions about SOAP that went up in chat too. It's important to be honest and try to recruit those residents that are interested in rural areas. And that was part of the RPD commitment to HRSA, is that we track and monitor that. And that is difficult to ask a person in interviews and get a genuine answer. But a lot of times you can kind of tell by nature of where they trained. For example, I went to medical school in West Virginia and trained in Mississippi, both in rural areas. So by nature, that's kind of what I'm comfortable with. And so that kind of leans to itself, I think, in recruitment.
Yeah, to address, so shout out to Cheryl O'Malley, who's I believe is the chair of the review committee for internal medicine, and Furman McDonald, who's the senior vice president for academic affairs at ABIM. Thank you for being part of this conversation. It's key. It's very clear to me that the country is, at least the educational community is very invested in your success, and understand that we all have a lot to learn. There is one program in Oxford, Mississippi, which became accredited like in February 1st, because the review committee for internal medicine, I think, meets at the end of January on their schedule, and they filled with a great class in like 1 week. But they also had what they had is an organizational infrastructure with Baptist Memorial, which has a lot of experience with graduate medical education, and a very knowledgeable DIO for the system. So they didn't have to start from it wasn't a standing jump, it was a running jump for them to get started. And they were able to recruit through their relationship with the osteopathic medical schools to get a great class. That's going to be more difficult for a program that like Amanda, starting really from a standing long jump. It's more challenging because you don't have those contacts, you don't have the network. I think 36 months on the HRSA grant is very doable if you have that knowledge and infrastructure. 36 months if you, I don't know what the lead time for Joe's program was, but I know in I see Kathy Glenn from the Billings internal medicine program, that had a lead time of about 5 years from somebody had the idea to actually having a residence on track. So the whole networking thing, both for the educational pipeline, but also for the knowledge pipeline, is really important. I'm also interested with Joe, particularly Joe and Amanda, and also Matt, the idea of the medical schools in your region. My feeling from working as a technical advisor is that some of the state medical schools are not uniformly supportive of rural programs. Sometimes there can be something of a market issue. Others are very supportive and are behind it very well. Would any of you like to make a comment about that?
Yeah, I just say, Roger, that I really had strong connections with the teaching programs at both the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville through my own personal involvement in the American College of Physicians. I was a governor several years ago for the state ACP chapter, and so my connections inside the academic medical centers have always been and have remained strong. And so I really have not felt any real sense of, in fact, they have bent over backwards to accept us academically. And in our state ACP meeting every year, we compete with them academically now and do poster presentations and do medical jeopardy with them. So I really think that our residents feel as if they are on an equal footing with the academic medical centers in our state. And I think that those connections that I had established professionally before were really useful to me in that fashion. I would say that in reference to what you had spoken about before, our timeline really from conception to launch here was probably just about 18 months to 2 years. And most of that was because we were too stupid to know that it should take us any longer than that. And I also think that the fact that we came into graduate medical education at a time when the osteopathic medical schools were really desperate for the development of graduate medical education spots for their residents to begin to ascend into. And so we had a lot of push and a lot of assistance in that fashion. I think that probably, and this is true for me as an allopath, I really didn't know much about the osteopathic world at the beginning of all of this. I've become much better educated about it. I think as a general rule that osteopathic medical students have a different concept of what it means to be educated in graduate medical education. They tend to go to medical school in more rural areas and live in rural communities while they're doing that. And they are much more open to the concept of training in internal medicine in an area like this, where allopaths might consider it to be a step down in their professional development to come to a rural center to train. So the large bulk of our graduates have been osteopaths up to this point in time. And it's amazing to me to watch how the status of our medical staff has changed to the point where probably a third to 40% of all of the teaching or all of the physicians on our staff now are osteopaths. So the training program has really shifted the way that things have happened inside our medical center. And I think that one of the things that people in the allopathic world, especially with single accreditation, have to be used to is that these are our brothers and sisters. And one of the ways for us to really strengthen academic general internal medicine is to be much more open to the idea that we're all on the same footing and that we're all trying to do the same thing. So that's what I take away from it over the course of the last little bit. And I wouldn't have not wanted to have started this journey without the support of the osteopathic medical schools that we've been affiliated in Pikeville and in Harricot, Tennessee from the beginning.
You know, if you want to think about the UME to GME transition, something that is different in the osteopathic community is that I have third years here in the hospital who do all of their core rotations here in Paris, Tennessee. And that was the same for my medical education in West Virginia. So perhaps it doesn't just start in residency program, it starts earlier. In the third and fourth year, where you're not trained, you know, in Tennessee at the Med and Baptist, which was a monster of a hospital, but instead to start and train physicians to be rural physicians. Maybe it starts in the undergrad. And to speak to the university pressures, Tennessee has traditionally been a strong community of medical colleges. And that's how in legislature funding was even established. So to get funding from the state of Tennessee, unless you were affiliated with those 4 universities, you couldn't get into some of the funding that was allocated to graduate medical education. That has thankfully shifted hard this year. And so tides are changing, but contexts like that are barriers that you have to address and just verbalize it, that it exists.
Yeah, and I'd love to hop in too, just a bit contrasting, if that's okay, Roger, unless you agree. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. But, you know, I do think that one of the most recent publications from the HRSA group sort of argue that there's a sweet spot for rural residencies. And I really enjoyed that sort of idea that, you know, you're looking for communities that are in rural places that have enough resources to make a program like this work. And I think a lot of the conversation that we've all been having here is about what those resources look like and what they are. And, you know, I do think one of the surprises in some ways is, you know, you take a place like where I work that may have an area deprivation index of 100, but the sort of resources that are there are incredible. And so, you know, I do think we're all in this, we all have our own sweet spots to some degree that kind of make these programs make sense. And it's really, I think reinforces the diversity of rural America in some ways, how rich and different some of these challenges are we face. And I think that's one of the themes that I really like to bring to an internal medicine audience, because I think a lot of people in IM, you know, look at the rural US and say, well, it's hard to imagine, you know, how this is all going to work out. But there's actually quite a bit there if one sort of keeps one's eyes and ears open. And that's been a real incredible part of doing this work from my perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think that's a really important point. You know, almost 45 years ago, there was a talk given by one of the original gangsters in family medicine. Gail Stevens was really a thought leader in family medicine. He described in a talk he gave to the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine that primary care really is a countercultural group, that you're raised in one culture and you make a decision to do something else. And I think that to some extent that's true in internal medicine. That what we're seeing is general internal medicine is, largely becoming hospital medicine. It seems like that's where the winds are blowing. And the message, the positive message here is there really is an affirmative image to be, and a story to be made about rural medicine, and where some internal medicine programs are looking for the person with multiple publications in Journal of Clinical Investigation. They're going to go do a fellowship, and their AOA, junior AOA, they look great. In a rural program, that person is just not appropriate. It's almost a waste of everybody's time. There are still enough of these positive deviants out there, people who understand the need and are willing to fill it, who are very suitable for training in rural areas and staying there. What's on us is articulating that narrative and getting the message out so that students and residents understand that this is a fulfilling, sustainable, and rewarding career.
Roger, one of the things I'd just like to feed into, and when I go back into my own training down in Birmingham, which is almost hard for me to believe, almost 4 decades ago, I worked almost semi-independently in a lot of ways inside the rural hospital for the indigent in Jefferson County and in Birmingham, and also at the VA. And we were largely responsible, without much subspecialty help, to be able to care for our patients, and were really comfortable inside an ICU and critical care environment. And I find that in university centers, a lot of people are graduating at the end of 3 years with, in many ways, the skill set unnecessary to be able to work in an institution in which they're not fully supported at all times by subspecialists. So in some ways, we're almost going back to the future here and trying to make certain that the people that we train are really capable of being either outpatient or inpatient true generalists, which is, I think, what hopefully our patients deserve. And there's no question that it's been much easier for our graduates to get job positions as they come out because of the skill set that they have at the time they graduate.
Yeah, it really requires a skill set of a capital G generalist. You cannot be a partialist and take call in a small town. I found that early in my career that if you're the only doctor in town and you're an internist and a 2-year-old comes in, it's you. Internal medicine is not going to embrace that, but that sense of generalism is really important. So we have just a couple minutes left. This is being recorded and it will go up. My understanding from Sheila is it'll go up at the end of the month. If you have any questions, I'm Roger W. Bush at gmail.com. Couldn't be easier than that. I can ask the other presenters to put their emails in the chat if you want to contact us. By all means, you can go to the Rural GME website, ruralgme.org. There's a wonderful toolkit and a whole list of resources, even to the point of finding out if you're actually rural. There's an Am I Rural website where you can put your zip code in and find out if you meet the federal definition of rural. Thank you so much for your attention and participation. Sheila, is there anything else that we should say before our time runs out?
No, we really appreciate all of the presenters, the work that you put into this session. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheila. There was a message from Paul where the idea of getting together at AAIM in April. I don't believe there's anything scheduled, but I've always thought the receptions and the poster sessions are some of the best time. Certainly, one of the best places to recruit a program director. If you all can look for each other at Aptum in Austin, hopefully you can help each other, because it really is it really is a community of practice and solutions. It's a community built around the needs of the people that are currently suffering unattended. So thank you all for your attention, and look forward to y'all getting together in Austin.